Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In this fifth and final portion of the second lecture on descriptive statistics and Islamic approach, we will discuss how subjective values enter into apparently objective looking numbers. We have seen that the college rankings depend on 7 factors which were listed, but where do these factors come from? You and I could think about a large number of other factors, how social networks on campus, extracurricular activities, this, that, and the other. So how were these factors chosen? Um Actually, what really happens is that initially there is some intuition about which colleges are good. For example, everybody thinks that Harvard is the top college. So we try to choose factors which will make this happen, which will make it come out so that the Harvard gets a high ranking and Yale gets a high ranking. So this intuition about which colleges are good is captured by factors which match this intuition. So it's not that the factors are creating the ranking, it's actually the public perception and intuition which creates the factors which are chosen. Uh, so this conceals the nature of the process. People think that the factors are objective and that is what leads to the ranking, but actually the ranking occurs intuitively in public perception first, and that is what leads to the factors. And so the choice of factors is subjective, depends on intuition, but this is concealed and this is part of the deception of statistics. As a clear illustration of this, Malcolm Gladwell notes that price of education is not included in the 7 factors. It's not included in any of the factors. When you ask the authors, they say, oh, there's no particular reason, this is just our judgment. So there's no reason given for excluding price. Now, actually, if you include the price, then the top universities like Harvard, Yale, etc., they are all very expensive. So actually, this would go against them. Malcolm Gladwell says, what happens if we do put in the price? Then it turns out that some unknown universities start appearing in the top 10. What that means is that these universities can give a great education at a very low price. So this goes against what the public perception is, and that would be very annoying if a ranking had a very unknown university coming in the top 10. People would distrust the ranking. So that's why you need to make the ranking in such a way that the unknown universities don't appear and don't cause distrust in the ranking. Malcolm Gladwell refers to a ranking game which is available on the internet that gives you data on law schools, and you get to choose which factors to use and what weights to assign. Using this, you can make any college come out on top as you like. You can replicate the popular rankings according to the public perception by choosing one set of weights, and you can create any other kind of ranking that you like, especially if you look carefully at which scores, which university scores high on which factor, you can make any university come out on top. So initially, the factors are chosen to replicate the public popular perception so as to get them legitimacy that this is a good ranking because it ranks Harvard, Yale, etc., the well-known universities at the top. Once the ranking gets established, then it gets a life of its own and it gets value and worth, and then people chase after this ranking as if it was an objective criteria. Just to illustrate this in a different context, the dominant country gets to make the rules about what is measured and how it is measured. Before World War I, when Britannia ruled the waves, the criteria for power was not GDP, it was sea power, it was coal mines, which was energy access, and many other things. But it all came out so that Britannia would come out on top. After World War I, when European countries were very much destroyed by the war, Kuznets and US rose to the top. Kuznets introduced the concept of the GDP, which made US dominant across the globe. Sometime later, when the oil economies got very rich and they had very few people, they had higher GDP per capita, so it was argued that income distribution matters, and these countries don't qualify as richer than USA because they don't have good income distributions. One sheikh has all the money, for example. After that, when Switzerland and Sweden and some European countries managed to get higher GNP per capita and they had good income distributions, it was said that, well, really, if you want to measure power, you have to look at infrastructure and land and wealth and natural resources, which US has much more than Europe. So depending on who gets to make the rules, and if the US is dominant, they get to make the rules, they get to choose the factors and the weights to ensure that they are top. And this is because the intuition is that they are the most powerful country, so whatever the ranking is, it should make them come out on top. Currently, because of the changing geopolitical scenario, different criteria according to you can choose in which US or China, either one could come out on top, and you can make some other countries come out on top as well. If I choose the criteria, I can make Pakistan come out on top. I can choose suicide rates, whether or not people are coming into are being brought up, children are being brought up in families. I can look at alcoholism, crime rates, and many other, how many people are going into psychotherapy. All of these statistics in which Pakistan would rank very highly and be on top of the USA, for example. So the choice of factors is very subjective and depends on who is doing the ranking. As Malcolm Gladwell puts it, rankings depend on implicit ideological judgments. The choice of factors represents value judgments. Now, the strange thing is that because of the influence of positivism, instead of openly saying that this is what we value and that's why we are measuring it, you have to hide it under the facade or the cover of objectivity. And this is what creates a deception. So he gives an example, Malcolm Gladwell, of selectivity. So selectivity is about what percentage are admitted. Now, the top colleges are all highly selective, so this is considered as a good thing, even though, as we will see, it can also be a bad thing. One implication of this is that selectivity leads to low ranking on graduation rates. Now, this is a little bit complicated because graduation rates are not just direct graduation rates, they are adjusted. So if a university admits only A grade students who would graduate at 98% rate anyway, from anywhere, the score is not how much the graduation rate is, but how much you improve on the expected graduation. So if a university admits very poor students who would graduate, let's say only 50% of them would graduate, and it manages to graduate 60% of them, that means that it has increased it has added value of about 10%. So in Yale, for example, the students are so good that they would automatically graduate 98% of them. So Yale only has a chance to improve them by about 2%. So these two factors, they run against one another. If you have high selectivity, you can't have a high graduation rate. If you have high graduation rate, you can't have high selectivity. So then the question arises, how should we select between these two? We cannot have both, so should we put selectivity higher and graduation rate lower, or vice versa? Well, there's no right answer. It depends on our values. The US News and World Report puts a factor of 2 times on selectivity, on 1 times on graduation rate, and this matches the standard rankings, and it shows a preference for Yale over Penn State, a small private university, over a large public university. But if a student is choosing college, depending on his or her status, they might prefer selectivity because you can get, or they might prefer a non-selective. If you go into a selective college, you can get better jobs and get better peers. But if you don't have the credentials, you might prefer a less selective college. Government, which wants to fund colleges, would want to fund colleges which have a high graduation rate because they want to educate the masses. So what we choose depends on the purpose for which we are doing the ranking very strongly. So these rankings are not a game. They make a huge difference. They they create public mindset, funding, choices made by students, professors. A lot of things are affected by these rankings. And in these rankings, the top 20 universities are always private, wealthy universities. And if you analyze why, you find that nearly everything that you rank comes initially from wealth. The more wealthy you are, the higher the ranking. Now, Penn State is a very popular public university. It has the largest number of applications, but there is no way they can make it into the top 20 because they don't have the billions of dollars required to do so. And this seems like a value judgment against Penn State. So Malcolm Gladwell comes to the conclusion that rankings really reflect the mindset of a ranker, and he gives the example of Professor Huntington, who asked his friends to rank civilizations. And since all of them knew only about USA and UK, they ranked these as on top, and all of the world which they don't know anything about, like China and African civilization and Latin American, they ranked at the bottom. So basically, ranking is just a reflection of your personal prejudices. To conclude this lecture, we note the famous saying that statistics are the eyes of the state. What the state action takes, what action the state takes depends on what numbers are reported to it. And if there are numbers which are not reported, like amount of hunger or other important factors in the lives of the people, then no action will be taken on those matters. So the rankings matter. The fact is that today GNP dominates the world, and every country has ministries and vast amounts of people attempting to improve the GNP numbers. But the target of the ranking is the number, and you can often manipulate statistics in ways which will increase the GNP but have no effect on lives of the people. So focusing on improving the numbers can lead to harmful policies, whereas what we would like to do is to focus on the reality that the numbers are meant to measure. We want to focus on improving human lives and not on increasing GNP numbers. There is a very important book by Stiglitz called Mismeasuring Our Lives, Why GNP Does Not Add Up, in which he explains how very important aspects of our human lives are not captured in the GNP and how this leads to bad policy. But this is not really, it's not really about GNP. These rankings are used all across the board in many, many areas. And because lots of things that we do are heterogeneous and multidimensional, and you have to somehow, for example, if a student is taking a class, you have to in the end give him one number for a grade, even though he may have done many different kinds of things and performed well in some areas and badly in others. But if you choose one number, this will automatically cause distortions. So at the heart of the Islamic approach is the idea that we should make the values that we are using explicit instead of making them appear to be objective, and we should focus on the reality behind the numbers and not just the numbers. And this will make a radical difference in the approach to statistics.